Okay, so we will start. I request Akshay to give us a quick introduction to Pro Helvetia and critical conditions, and we will launch from there into the conversation. Akshay, if you can please come on screen.
Hello. Hi. Thanks, Shazib. Can everyone hear me?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, great. Hello. Hello, everyone. Some familiar faces, familiar names, and some I don't know. So, hello, my name is Akshay Patak, and I head Pro Helvetia's office in South Asia, which looks at promoting Swiss arts in the region and also creating exchanges with the local art scene in South Asia and increasingly also Southeast Asia. I'm very glad that we're finally having this moment. It's taken, actually, if I'm not wrong, Shazeb, it's taken about 2 years of very many conversations to finally see it happen. I could almost say that it was somewhat jinxed in some ways, that something or the other came up, and then we were all supposed to meet sometime in August, I think September, sorry. And then the world, of course, became a very different place, as we all know. But I'm very glad that it's finally happening, and I'm very excited about the very relevant and definitely the very interesting conversations that are ongoing and will happen tomorrow. Just a little bit about critical conditions. It's a sort of an umbrella term that we at Pro Helvetia envisage as a space for critical discussions. We've already had some editions of this in a very different format. This is the largest such gathering under that umbrella. But the idea is to explore issues of relevance to the globe, to all of us as artists, as citizens, and to look at the intersections of the various disciplines as well as other streams. So what you're witnessing here, put together brilliantly by Shazeb, is definitely, I would say, a kind of should be a living archive for how we think and relate to each other and the world around us. And especially in a situation like this, I must say, I must thank Shazeb and the Story of Foundation to make it happen, because it's been very difficult few months. Everybody was thrown in, flummoxed with all the situation. But I'm very glad that it's happening. So thank you very much. Thank you to also my team in Pro Helvetia, who kind of have, despite all odds, been working hard to make this happen. And thanks to all of you to agree to be part of it. And I'm really excited to listen to you and learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akshay. And yeah, we'll straight away get into the conversation. So just to sorry, I just hear some disturbance from somewhere. So just to quickly introduce, what we have been up to with this format. It started with what you have just come back from, which was hoping to put you in touch with people, who may not be experts, who are still trying to find their way in terms of how can we be inspired, find our ways to act for nature and for ecology. So the nature of this conversation is not really going to get into matters of expertise, but more the soft, how we relate to ecology and all the different perspectives that all of you bring to the table because of your connections with your work with ecology. So the first question that I have, and because we have a few questions, maybe the questions may not go to each one of you. So I'll continue to try to moderate so that, we all have something to add to this panel. But it's just to try and understand all of us better, our connections with nature and the different disciplines that make this happen. So I would like to start with Anne-Marie, actually, with the first question, which is, what's your personal connection with nature? Do you think you were born with it, with this ecology, or it developed along the way, or what made it develop and evolve? So that's the first question, just to understand you and your connection with nature.
Yeah, thank you, Shazad, also for the invitation. Yeah, actually, that's a funny a question. I mean, it's a very good question, because usually nobody asks you that. I grew up in the countryside. I grew up close to the Northern Sea, like really in the countryside. It's 300 inhabitants a village. But then I lived throughout my whole life in big cities. And I always had this nostalgia to go back to the countryside, even though if you work as a curator, as a thinker, you cannot really live in the countryside, because then you lose your network, you use your connection. And in 2005, when I decided together with my co-founder, Corinne Ernie, to establish Artport Making Waves, we were both really established in the contemporary art world. And she is from Switzerland, actually. She also grew up in the countryside and living in New York for more than 30 years right now. And I was living in Spain, in Valencia at that time. We said, we want to create something contemporary art-like, like a curatorial collective, but it has to be focused on environmental protection. How do we do that? And I just read at that time the book of Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth, and we said, well, climate change is actually the umbrella topic for everything, where everything comes together. All what we did in the last years, in the last decades, is all ending up under the umbrella of climate change. So we really should work on that. So that was actually the point of departure.
Okay, Ursula, if I can pass the question to you, do you think you've always had this connection with nature, or were there some instances that made it develop over time?
I think I've always had a strong connection with nature. And most of my travels go to destinations that is very nature, has some degree of wilderness still. And for me, it was obvious that I should start including that in my work. I think my first works were a lot more about globalization and migration and borders, and those seem to be the really urgent topics. But about 10 years ago, I made a big swing into another direction that relates to ecology and climate change and resource extraction and so on. So I think it's it ties back. I feel very, very comfortable working with the topic, and I want to continue to do so.
Okay, thank you. Richard, can I ask you the same question? Your connection with nature? We can't hear you. You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah.
You're on mute.
Yes. Am I okay now?
Yeah.
Am I audible? Yes. So unfortunately, I can't say the same thing, that I've grown up in a village, but then India, I think 2 decades ago was a very different place. So even cities, like I grew up in Mumbai, but even the cities that we grew up in, I think there was a lot more interaction with nature. I mean, it's just the way that we grew up in. We played in mud, right? We actually felt soil under our feet. We didn't know what today's kids call the video game world, right? We kind of got introduced to it a little later. So we probably interacted a lot more with nature just because of the way that the circumstance that was there. But I think the hard knock on my head came when I said this at the start of my conversation, because in the city of Panjim, where I now live, in the year 2002, the waste that we used to get rid of used to go to a landfill site, and like everywhere else in the country, and the wall around the landfill site actually gave way, and that waste went tumbling into the village below, into their wells, into their fields. And it was really a sad sight to see. And of course, those villagers came up in arms and said that we won't let you dump your waste here anymore. And Panjim had to think on its feet. And, we were some of those who were fortunate enough to have had that opportunity to be with the city and work with the city to come and find a solution. And I thought, my goodness, if a small city like Panjim is, facing such a large crisis, imagine what it is for the rest of the country and the rest of the world. And really, that's where I realized that we need to do something very different. And so I actually plunged headlong and wanting to make a difference. And I've been working with waste and finding solutions for that ever since.
Thank you, Richard. I will pass for also for the same thing, for the same question, which is your personal connection with nature. Have you always had it? Was it something that developed over time, or experiences like what Richard was just talking about? You're on mute.
Been asking me?
No, Johannes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Shazeb, and also thank you for the invitation. It was a fruitful first round. Much too short, but we continued the conversation as well. Well, I was all my life a city boy, and I would say I'm a nature immigrant, maybe. It just came in the last 5 years. So I lived in, well, Switzerland is more or less countryside with a little bit small villages, small towns. But I lived 2 years in London, 2 years in Berlin, 2 years in New York. So all big cities, and basically nature was not more than a park or a garden. But through, on one hand, my artistic practice, on one side, the blog project, which runs now since 10 years, we started to work with trees. And this brought me then more to the countryside and also the traveling. And that was a shift. And the other was the interest in land art, which grew during my residencies in Los Angeles and New York, where we visited all these remote places. And working with that, my interest started to make something similar in Switzerland. And so that's why since 5 years we built up in a really remote place in a Swiss Alpine Valley. We built up this Institute of Land and Environmental Art and this Biennale. And since then I'm starting to, which became not a nature boy at all. But nature, it's all, everything there also is not nature, it's cultural landscape, to make sure of that. But I'm still at the very beginning in this field. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the second question, because the second question is sort of a lead up to this first question, that what really connects us with nature, because some of us have had experiences that have sparked inspiration to start projects like you've done, Johannes, or like what Richard is doing. But the next question is actually based on philosophy. The first question was based on understanding us personally and a connection with nature. I'll take it to Robin and ask you this question, which is, do you think we are part of nature? Or this question that arises sometimes, whether in formal or informal conversations, that are we part of nature or are we not?
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I've been thinking about it, listening to some of the answers, and it also came up during the great conversation we had earlier in the room. And there's always this clear distinction people think they can make between nature and culture. And you just brought this up, Johannes, which I always strive to blur, and which, for me at least in my mind, shouldn't be there. I think culture and nature aren't two different things. We talk about the wilderness, we talk about growing up in the city. There's no nature in the city, and I think these are maybe just different expressions of nature. And I would definitely say, yes, we are part of nature. It's impossible to take us out of nature. I think what is interesting is this idea of untouched nature, of the wilderness, as something we can maybe escape into. And maybe that's also in a certain way dangerous, because we think, okay, we messed up this place, but there's still a little bit of wilderness or something out there that we can maybe try to expand or come back to. But maybe it's not about coming back to that. Maybe it's really about acknowledging what we have made, what we have destroyed, and through destruction also created, and maybe through accessing that and understanding that and re-becoming part of nature and accepting that we are part of nature, re-enter the world itself. Because I think there's something dangerous in thinking that there's us out of the world as a human special race, and the mind out there that is something out there that we can preserve, and then there's nature around us which we can interact with, or that we can control, or that we have to preserve. I think by separating the two, there's already some form of domination really in that, and by accepting that we are part of nature, and that by preserving nature we preserve us, and that by preserving us we can also find ways of living that are more sustainable, I think turns it around. So this nature culture debate, I think, is maybe philosophically really at the heart of that. I mean, there's a bunch of interesting studies about dogs, for example, how we think, oh yeah, dogs are like the expression of human culture, where we took wild wolves and we made them into these living tools for man, and tools or friends, depending whom you talk to, right? But then there's this other point of view where people studying archaeological remains of early societies and dogs, and who say, well, maybe dogs also evolved for us to accept them into our homes, and the vision where people say, oh, maybe dogs actually won the game because they just hang around and we bring them the food and we take them out for walks and we follow them. So maybe this idea of us like dominating nature and making it part of it is also an ideology. And I think this ideological part of it is dangerous.
Right. I would take the question to Jasmine. Jasmine, what's your take on, like this question of, are we part of nature or are we not? Or, has this changed over the years?
Oh no, fundamentally, of course we are. Philosophically, if you go back to the ancient sort of Greek myths and everything, we were just small specks in a universe. And then somewhere in the 16th century, all of a sudden it became about this idea of controlling of nature, of course. And now, hopefully, bit by bit, we are realizing that in order to survive, we have to be symbiotic. But just listening to this, if you one of the sort of triangles that's always fascinated me is the Maslow's sort of hierarchical, pyramid of hierarchical needs, and this idea that ultimately we might ascend to a level of self-awareness and then transcendence, which I like to imagine we're capable of. But if we can't sustain the most basic levels of our needs, and the most basic levels are water, air, shelter, food, and certainly from my point of view, dealing with the idea of the breath, you can only survive for 3 minutes if you can't breathe. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are, or how technologically advanced you are. If you can't actually take a breath in and out, you can't progress into that. I have no idea what that is, but that sounds like nature happening in the background somewhere.
that's two little bugs in the room.
So yeah, this is good. This is what we need. We need sort of nature in the room. So of course, we've evolved from, we are a series of wonderful chance, serendipitous events, and we can't be separated from that. But yeah, this idea that we are somehow separate is complete nonsense. And again, the environment, this idea of environmentalism, it has crept up on me. It's not something that I kind of set out to do. And it's only when it becomes incredibly personal, I think, that you realize how very human you are and how very vulnerable you are. And certainly right. For me, this came when my son had a huge asthma attack 4 years ago. So at no point really had I ever thought about breathing. It had never really occurred to me until someone I love very much was struggling with it. And then, of course, it makes you think about everything and everyone, and it becomes much more personal. So, yes, we are inextricably sort of linked to it.
Right. Marcus, with your work also, you're trying to kind of, do you think with your work also you're trying to find ways to communicate with nature, and in that sense, from that context of your practice, what do you think is the answer to this? And of course, the answer is not in a yes or no, but do you think we are part of nature, or it's a relationship that's sort of been kind of been been taking some people away, or maybe the mindset away for some people, and that's why we don't tend to always act in its favor. So what is your take on whether we are still part of nature, or it's just a question in our heads?
Well, I think to be able to communicate somehow with the non-human species, you rather should start to listen first. I think that's a bit the motive I have in my work, that I try to listen much more intensively to what happens around us than I did maybe before. And I think there you realize quickly that it's a complete obsolete question if we are or are not part of nature. That's also the pandemic recently showing to us how radically we're still part of that huge ecosystem that we're living in. So we cannot even flee the darker sides of these aspects. But I think communication with non-human species, in my case, especially if you look to plants, that's something which is very speculative and very difficult to reach somehow. So I'm still in the state of listening.
Okay. Thank you. Pankaj, how about you?
Hi. So, actually, to be very honest, this is a question I've grappled with, and at the moment I've kind of given up. I'm kind of, I guess we all go through our moments, and I think when I was younger, I was trying to grapple with this a lot. But, 2-3 things that come to mind is, it also depends on what, say, you mean, or what I mean, or what we mean when we say nature.
Right.
And if it's the idea of the wilderness constructed in a particular way, and I think, I forget who, but somebody who said, no, all spaces are cultural spaces, then I think that becomes a very interesting way to look at the whole thing. And I remember long ago, now I don't know whether it's a construction of my mind, that conversation, or they actually was, I was talking to somebody much young, when I was much younger, about nature, and this person told me that, do you observe the nails growing on your hands? And do you not see nature operating through you in that kind of way?
Right.
It's kind of a very interesting way of, I think, looking at what all the others have said. But really, I've kind of, at the moment, stopped grappling with that question. Also because, more recently, my work and my research and my more academic work has been in what's called STS, which is Science and Technology Studies. And which are sociological studies of science and technology, and anthropological studies of could be contemporary technology, could be emerging technology, could be traditional technologies. And one of the ideas that comes across through that work, which I find very interesting, and it kind of complicates the matter hugely further, is that scholars there have been articulating of all our cultures as being technological cultures. So, it's not about culture, nature, but if technology is a manifestation of culture or vice versa in some ways, then the idea that we are all technological beings in different ways, because we do, all human beings use technologies, it's only a level of a difference of degree perhaps.
Right.
Then what happens to this idea of the relationship between human being on the one hand and technology and nature, say, on the other? If in the classical thing, we've always said that we've moved away from this nature, whatever we mean, and
Right.
technology is the way to go about, or the way we've done it. The Anthropocene perhaps is the manifestation of that reality, where so much intervention has been made that the nature of the planet and the nature of the planetary forces have changed now. So I think it's an important question, but like I said, I've stopped grappling, and I don't know. Of course, we are not separate. I agree with all the others, but what that means really, I think, is more nuanced and more granular. And that's perhaps what might be a very interesting investigation and engagement for all of us in our different ways.
Right. Tida, how about you? You are working very closely with plants, and when we I mean, when you think about the lay person and this philosophical question of are we part of nature, maybe for a lot of people, the first things that come to mind is like, the flora or the trees or the plants and so on. And with all your work, you have been trying to kind of, in fact, the topic of your room was organic intelligence in the times of, or OI, organic intelligence in the times of AI, where we're talking about artificial intelligence. Also, sometimes the things that we apply to understand nature better, but just like how we've not really understood the human body or the human brain so much, do you think that this question is also somewhere sort of connected to that idea that we don't understand too well that what do we mean by being part of nature, or the separation that that seems to be like a global mindset because of the way things are happening and the crises that we are living in?
Sorry, you were asking to me, Shasef?
To Tida, Amit.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So the question was for him. I mean, I know it's a bit of a taboo subject, but when we start discussing human beings and plants, we are genetically encoded by the same genotypes. When we start looking at our survival, we get free air, free food, our air supply, everything comes from plants. So would it be so complicated to just imagine that maybe plants can speak to us? And I think that's where entheogens have, even though it's something that is of a gray area of research, but definitely that human beings connecting with the earth on a much more metaphysical way, in a sense, consumption of entheogens, things like psilocybin mushrooms, ayahuasca, peyote, things that have been in cultures for hundreds of years, and in cultures that discuss spirituality, connections with the earth. And this is something that has been disconnected with human beings since the early 70s. Our genuine connection with plants, our communication with plants has been stopped by laws and regulations. So I definitely feel that our deep-rooted connections with plants is that we do have the ability to speak to plants. We do have an ability to understand more about our existence on this planet. It doesn't come in the form of a book, but it does come in the form of a brown tea in a tiny cup in the Amazon.
Okay, so that takes me to Ivan. Also because you're working with setting up an indigenous university in the Amazon, and I could assume that those kind of projects or initiatives also are somewhere to kind of like help us connect, or maybe like look at indigenous knowledge over technological knowledge or advanced and scientific knowledge. So yeah, what's your perspective on this question?
Sorry, I was thinking about that, and I think kind of building on what Pangjag was saying. I think there are communities around the world where the division between nature and culture does not exist. I mean, there are no words to refer to all the beings and existence that are in relentless entanglements. It's and I think a case in point is the Amazon, and Amit was talking about plants and how our connections with plants might attest to that. And certainly in the crafting of this university and our participation with Ursula, plants are very important actors of this, and for many of those communities, plants are not are persons, are people in their own right. They are not objects of description or taxonomic conversation. They're not, the matter of factness of our food practices. It's plants are entities that are sentient and intelligent and make decisions. And Amit was talking about different plants that are used in these communities, the ayahuasca being one of them, the concoction, which is a combination of two different plants. And for the community that Ursula and I are working with, that's a central entity. That's the root of their culture, the root of their territory, as they say. So being the root of a territory means that you build a world out of it. instead of that being external to you, it's you build autonomy, you build culture, you build everything in conversation. You make decisions in conversation with that entity. So in that kind of ontology, let's use that word, in that kind of way of creating worlds, the division between nature and culture does not hold, because you are already in that relationship. You exist because you are already entangled with that. And that principle, we want to make it very explicit in the crafting, in our collaboration, crafting the university. The fact that we are all sentient entities, there are continuities everywhere in nature. The difficulty of building a new language, we are all caught up with that language. But also, in our panel, we didn't talk much about this idea of thinking forests, and I think that's a very important component of this conversation as we think about the university conceptually, because for these communities we're learning that as well. The forest is living. The forest is not something that is external to that, to culture or something like that. It's living, and we're trying to grapple with that conceptually as we talk, as we help to create this university.
Okay. Thank you. We'll move to the next question, which is moving from the philosophical aspect into let's say the hopes and dreams of our collective hopes and dreams, and would like to ask Anne-Marie that let's like assuming that we are going through a lot of issues where a lot of species are getting wiped out. There is definitely a big shift that we have seen in the last 2 decades. Coming from a lot more decades before that, but we've seen a lot of acceleration of late, and seeing that a lot of our actions have kind of also led for some of this to accelerate in this manner. What makes you give up, and what gives you hope? So what are the things that you see around you that really make you give up with all the motivation and inspiration and the things that you're doing, and on the other hand, what is it that gives you hope in this time? So in a way, the question is that what inspires you to keep going in this daily deterioration of climate and nature that we're seeing?
Thank you for this question. First of all, I never give up. I mean, there is a lot of hopelessness around right now, which is specifically popularism. I don't know if you can use this word, but what media is creating, what societies are creating out of political reasons, and to keep people everywhere in the world like on a low level of education regarding environmental protection. It's consumption, it's this extreme consumption which is building up everywhere and which is hammered into our heads. This is kind of depressing, but for me there is never a reason to give up. What gives me a lot of hope is actually that in comparison to 15 years ago, we are much more right now working on this topic. We already sensitized during the last 15 years. We are putting together hybrid models where we are working together in the arts, in sciences, in education, in policy making. And when we started to work with the United Nations 11 years ago, nobody there was talking about contemporary art and climate change. We just started then 11 or 12 years ago. And working with young people right now, what we created I started We Are Ocean last year in Germany, and we are moving it all over the planet now. With a lot of virtual work, by the way, as well. And it really gives me hope to see the younger citizens having hope and transforming within the project from hopelessness, from really dark thoughts and ideas and fears they have, into something which is really hope and positive thinking, and seeing that they can really move something, that they have a voice, that they have power somehow. And also seeing that right now, talking to people, curators, art museums, directors, collectors, who have been laughing about us 15 years ago, are on the train right now. They are all, we are all pulling our forces, we are joining forces and work on the same topic. And this really gives me hope. And of course, there is still a lot of, it's crazy because right now we see the effects of what we have been doing in the last 20 years. So we need a lot more people to come on board of this train in order to work for environmental protection. But actually, for me, my work is much easier now than 15 years ago. So that gives me hope.
Okay. Johannes, what about you? are there things that you were talking about how you came, how you were like a city boy, and then there were things that changed along the way. But with your current initiatives and all the different things that you're doing in terms of your ecological practice to do with the arts, what gives you hope and what makes you give up sometimes? We can't hear you.
I would join Anne-Marie, where I mostly, I wouldn't say never, but mostly don't give up. But this year was kind of also challenging because of the COVID situation. We had to change a lot of things, probably all of you guys, travel-wise and organizing-wise. We had maybe for the Biennale and also for the Academy, we had a planning window of 2 weeks, and then we did not know, can we do it the exhibition, can we do the Academy. It turned out well in the end, but only European and also no flying artist in. And this is also the good thing, which gives me a little bit of hope, and less travel. Much more less travel, less emissions, and also the whole art market has and will change dramatically. The biennalization will change again. I think these are good things who come out of a dark thing, that we have to change the way I can see in my own practice, I was invited to so many different biennales and art fairs, and you jump on the plane and it's stupid. And this just changed. And obviously we would have met alive in India for the conference. This is a pity that it's not possible, but you made it possible through this platform. And the digitalization, well, if something good came out of the pandemic, is also this ultra boost for the digitalization. Like I teach in art schools, and they say, oh, it takes years that we can do that. It took 3 months and it was possible. And also this conversation now wouldn't have been possible a half year before, and it's possible. So it was a huge boost, and this gives me hope, and also hopefully, maybe this is blue-eyed, but this limitation of traveling and this limitation on other levels gives also a possibility, also in terms of environmental issues, which is a positive outcome. This gives me hope. Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask this question just one last time to Pankaj, because you were saying that you were grappling with this idea of whether are we part of nature or not, and let's say with that as a starting point, like what's your take on, or what is it that gives you hope, and what is it that makes you give up, especially also because you're working with the fragile ecologies of an island or researching that and close to that. What are things, let's say, that you see over there that gives you hope and that lets you down sometimes?
Yeah, and so quickly, I must also say, I'm not saying that we are not part of nature. So I'm just saying that the question of how do you define and where are the boundaries? I mean, it's not that. So that's just a small guy. So, in terms of a larger thing, I would think one is to kind of, the larger picture, I think, does tend to paralyze, because we see the trends and the directions in which we are moving as a whole. Sometimes I feel that it's nice to just kind of hide it away a little bit, just keep an eye on that, what's happening, but to figure out what one does on a personal level and keep doing that, whether it's research or the practice of communicating, or if a little bit of artistic practice, to find meaning and joy and enjoyment in what one does, because unless that happens, unless one, and I think like some of the other panelists said, that continuing to have hope And also, I think if we as individuals, I teach, I teach in a technology institute, and unless one feels the passion and one feels the interest and one feels the concern, it's not possible to communicate to a younger group of people. So to keep that sense and that life, as it were, alive within us, I think is a challenge in itself, and it can be done in very interesting ways. So the struggle, I think, and the challenge for me at least, is to keep reinventing myself and keep doing interesting things, learning, of course, all along the way. And I think at the other, on a very cynical kind of way to, is that nature is just too powerful. I mean, the systems of nature, and I look at, say, for the islands that I do some work in, there's no way we can match up to the power if something happens. And COVID in its own way is a very interesting example of that. These islands are deeply seismic zones where you have huge earthquakes, where a tsunami strikes once in a while, and you realize the significance of nature, and on the other hand, the insignificance of oneself. And it seems that it's best that if we approach all this with a sense of humility, is where hope lies. And acknowledging that and then trying to figure that out, I think, makes it worthwhile to continue, and also probably reach out in different ways to different people.
Thank you, Pankaj, for that. So now for the next question, which is moving from this the sense of hopes and dreams that we build around ourselves to move on into the future. These are some questions about taking action, and I'll start with Ursula. The question is, what was the last action you took in your life to align with your intentions for positive ecology? So it's just asking that a lot of us think about a lot of things to do. But what was exactly that last action that you took where, you made this big change in your own life, in your own lifestyle, that would essentially lead to something positive?
Yeah, I think it came a bit as a surprise to myself, perhaps, but I have been thinking and working in the last years a lot on how on changing our relationship to Earth, right? I mean, we need to change our way of thinking about Earth. And so far, I've done a lot of video works that document and involve themselves in this topic by creating, maybe also introducing ecological structures within the videos and so on. So to be experimental was really important, but it always remained on a level of image making, of representation of sorts. And that's why it came a bit as a surprise when these indigenous people in the south of Colombia asked me to get involved in the co-creation of a university, because that really ripped me out of my artistic practice, which was someone who walks around who does field work with the camera in my hand. And so now suddenly I'm involved in the building of something concrete that actually might change the lives of a lot of young people in that region, by creating a university, by creating a self-made structure of how to think, how to produce knowledge, and how to educate the next generation. So I think this will have a lasting effect, not only on those particular on that particular indigenous community, but I think it will reverberate in the whole region. And I think that's an amazing experience, no?
Yeah. And Jasmine, even with you, when I've been following your work, I've seen how you have sort of looked at challenges that we face with pollution and environmental issues, and how you react to that. So besides the things that we know about, which is the polymer that you also invented, with which you're making sculptures, what was the last action you took in your life to align with your intentions for positive ecology?
It's twofold, as you say. One is, I didn't invent the material, by the way. I'm just pioneering how to use a material that's intended for something else in sculpture. So it's twofold. One is, and it's not, this is the thing I realized in terms of ecology. If I hadn't made this public sculpture, one of the things I've learned from doing this is that when we create a piece of art, it's kind of fundamentally linked to the space that it goes in. I didn't really appreciate this until I had made this particular sculpture for the museum, because it's in a bee garden. So it's clearing the air for the bees, who apparently find it difficult to find their pollinating flowers when there's a lot of pollution. And it's a perfect symbiosis. We've had insect counters, and we've seen there's been a lot more insects. So this idea of creating something that is functional, as well as hopefully makes people stop, and the idea of rewilding as well. I've become very interested in that. We've seen quite a lot of that happening in the UK, sort of verges on motorways. They're being allowed to kind of be much freer. I also worked on a project with cleaning fluids, would you believe? Something that I never thought I would work with. This is method. They're also known as Ecover in the States. And I remember when somebody said, "Do you want to do this?" I went, "No, I don't want to do cleaning fluids." Again, closing my own perspective in, and I had to open it out. And they covered the bottles in some of my butterflies made from reused plastic. Now, what was lovely about that is that I could get a message out on bottles that are in supermarkets about, you know, wildlife, small things, just allowing your lawn to be, you know, don't cut it so often, allow certain plants to grow. So these are small fundamental things. And the bottles, for example, are so beautiful that people don't bin them. So this idea of reusing and reloving and using things to plant. So it's twofold. So it's from the making. But the other thing that I have, and again, this is why I'm so incredibly hopeful. I've seen it happening over the last 6 months. I teach a lot of designers and engineers, and I teach them about the divergent thinking. They're used to the converging. I teach them about the diverging. But what's particularly happened is I've seen people becoming much more creative, much more playful, going right back to basics and making things. And sometimes, you know, they might be doing cyanotypes. They might be using plants to actually create things. But this idea of not just nature, but our own creativity, especially in conjunction with it, replacing the highs that we get from consuming, because I think it's much more fundamental than that. I think it's not just how can we do, you know what it's like, if you ask people to do good for something else, they go, yeah, but what's in it for me? Right? That's what it's like. What's in it for me? If we can say, actually, you don't need to get your high from going off to buy stuff. You can get your high from creating stuff, getting in touch with something that you haven't done for a long time. That to me is like that's the divergent way of getting people to become much more environmentally aware. We're not hitting them with a stick, we're giving them the carrot. I think that's answered the question.
Right. And Marcus, with you, you know, with your work to do with sound and its connection with nature, which may be, you know, something that's a lot of abstraction for the regular people. Let's say, what are the actions that you have taken, or, you know, like you know, any last actions where you have tried to evolve also in your own lifestyle in terms of making things better?
Well, first, if I would have a look on my work, it's much about creating closeness to things that we cannot normally perceive. So, also technically spoken, what is very important there is something like an amplifier, for instance. So you amplify things that aren't normally hearable, and that takes these things closer to the people, especially our listening sense, I think, is closely related to our emotions through music, through singing, and all these things. So that is one thing which is really interesting me probably most, to create this kind of intimacy to the things in our environment that we normally not perceive. And of course, there are, at the other hand, concrete things. I think have changed in my case, but also many others. I travel much less. That's one thing. I have the luck that my studio and the place where I live are in newer houses that are run completely by solar energy and heating system from the ground. So, but that's just luck, I would say. But I think more important is that we all should try to keep up a dialogue about what is our place in the world. That's the thing that comes maybe most common in my mind when I move through the forest or encounter other organisms or other living forms. It's always the question, how can we find a new place or a new interpretation of that place? And I think that would be also the most important contribution to such discussion.
Right. Tida, I remember clearly when we were working together the last time, which was about statements, curating an exhibition of statements, and your statement was justify your place in the race. It was not a statement that it was something that came out of conversations and your dialogues with a lot of people, and you were maybe starting those conversations in terms of trying to find an action for people to take on. So what is your response to this question?
Well, I mean, obviously it's been a very interesting year. The two things that we did this year was, number one, we are growing a lot of ancient things like ayahuasca. We are growing this in India, for example. So this year we did plant about 50 vines in the south of India. But I guess the major thing that we got done this year was a open commission that was just completed on the 16th. And that was basically with the NLU in Delhi, the National Law University in Delhi, in which we're looking at the criminal reform laws of psychoactive substances, because it's all well and good discussing the use of entheogens for mental health. And in our perspective, mental health is kind of the reason why we have a bad climate. If we don't treat ourselves right, why we treat our planet any better? So our first step was to at least to allow entheogens to kind of be within that field for mental health research. We are looking at criminal reform laws that can at least give us a new change perspective on how we look at criminals using psychoactive substances, and how Ayurvedically with the Ayush ministry, how we can integrate entheogens within the Ayurvedic platform.
And Robin, how about you? Any last actions that that you have taken?
Well, I think it's interesting what Tida just said about the connection of mental health and the environment. And I think I believe very much in that if we don't know how to take care of ourselves and our health, we won't know how to take care of the world and the environment around us. I think that's a really interesting approach. And I don't know, I don't feel like I'm on a mission. And I try to understand things and discuss it with other people, and I feel that there's a very broad energy around me, and I feel it when I occasionally teach or at exhibitions, and I see like how programming's change and how events like this one are happening, which give me hope, and which I strive to participate and further. But then I think it's also a lot about just trying to find your own place in the world. Like we were talking about, are we part of the world? And somehow I think we have to become part of the world also. It's maybe we are naturally part of the world, but it's also a process of inhabiting the world. I think we can be, we're maybe just thrown into it, and I think it's a process of learning how to live in it. And just before the pandemic and COVID, I had done one last trip to the desert in Abu Dhabi, which was a very interesting experience, because it connects the search for fossil fuels and carbon emissions, and throws you into a desert which is generally considered as an inhabitable environment, but which in fact is inhabited. It's the desert is alive, and the desert is an organism, and I think we can learn how to live in it. We talk a lot about the forest and the thinking forest, but it's interesting to look at the deserts also, because they're extremely rich biome, and it brings together the thoughts of minerals and the shapes of wind pushing around grains of sand, and animals living in those environments, which we call hostile, but it's actually an environment which we can learn to inhabit. And maybe that's what I'm trying to do, like trying to figure out how to live here.
Awesome. Okay, so we have the last two questions. The second last one is about the way forward, because while this was, we tried to construct this as, like I said, a softer conversation, which is not so much about, exactly the work or the projects that we're doing, but a connection with nature. Because I think with this program, what we're also trying to do is democratize the conversations around ecology, so that, a lot of like people who are not really invested in this can also maybe somewhere find their way. And I would like to ask this question to Richard, because he's somebody who I know of personally, who's really made such a big leap in terms of where he started and where he's gone to right now, with working on a waste management project just in the building that he was living in, and going on to establish waste management plans for the whole state of Goa. Richard, what is a call to action you have to share with yourself, your family, and friends? What is that? What is the call to action that you would like to announce to everybody in the times that we live in? You're on mute.
I keep forgetting that. Hi. So, Shazib, it's interesting that you say call for action, but the space that I work in, it's only about action, because there's enough of talk happening, and there are enough of seminars, and there's so much of documentation and I would say legislation on the subject, and I'm speaking specifically in relation to waste and managing waste. And the path that I chose was to be the path that would act, right? And which is why we jumped feet first physically into the trash piles, because it's an amazing learning when you interact so closely with trash, because it teaches you things which are unimaginable. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea to work so closely with something that is not the most pleasing sights and smells, but I pushed myself, and we actually walked and trudged through this trash, because it's only when you reach in close proximity that you realize that it's not as simple as one looks at it. When you look at it from a distance, the visual you get is a black spot. Most people refer to trash dumps as black spots, and that's exactly what people see, one big black mass, and they say, oh, how do we look after, or how do we take care of this trash or this garbage? But when you go a little closer, and when you work, and when you reach in there, you realize that it's made up of hundreds and thousands and millions of different elements, and different both living and non-living mass. And then only can you actually understand how you're going to solve it, and how you're going to resolve it, and how you're going to walk backward. So yes, the path is all about action. And we have to act on it. But to simplify the whole thing, because I know you're looking at people who are looking at this who are not really involved so closely with waste, and I'm sure it's with every other aspect of the environment and ecology, is the power of one, right? I've made that my lifelong motto. That it's really easy to say, oh, but if this happened, then I could do this, or if more people were more observant, this could have happened. But I've changed or I've made it my motto to believe that I can make that difference, right? As one individual. And if I take, concrete steps and take some thoughtful steps in the direction to find a better way to do things, then what I do will reflect on someone else. And if I can change just one more person, or even better, if I can change two more people, then the multiplicity factor will take effect. And, we will see the difference, and we will be able to change people's, the way that people look at each of these challenges. And hopefully then the solution will come sooner than later.
Right. So I'm just going to ask that question to Ivan before, I'm sorry, we're already at 6. After that, I just have one very short question. But Ivan, what about you? A call to action for your family and friends, just to kind of, talk about the urgency aspect of what you feel about what's happening in the world today.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you. I mean, I understand that the format has its constraints, but I want to thank you first for the huge effort, Shazeb, for convening this meeting. I'm really honored to be here and talking with you guys as well.
Thank
and
you.
Also, Richard, thank you so much for that intro. I had never thought about trash that way, and I think I want to start there because it's something too foreign to most of us. But I think it's something worth thinking about, except because the world we live in is a world that produces trash, and it's something that we overlook quite often. And there are different ways in which we can relate to that. So that kind of really resonated with me. So yeah, call to action. Also, I want to say that we also, there are hundreds of ways in which we engage with divisions and separations. And one of them is nature and culture. The other is reflection and action. And I think they work both in tandem. And there is something about action that is reflection-like. As you do stuff, you think about them. And action is probably an embodied way of reflecting about the world and engaging with it and creating it anew, in a sense. And I think that principle of relationality, let's say, it's something that we really want to strive for in the co-creation of this university with Ursula. And for me personally, it has to do with how I reconnect first with myself, how I reconnect my thinking with my feeling as I do stuff, as I write, as I converse with people, as I do hundreds of actions. It's
right.
That's one first step, kind of reckoning with that already existing ongoing entanglement of life and matter. And going back to what Robin said about deserts, and I think yes, absolutely, I think it's deserts and forests. And this, I mean, the message that I want to put forward is this connecting stuff. It's all ecology, let's say. It's everything ecology and mind one. So it's getting attuned with that, and with with that idea, and with the co-creation of the university. That's how you can make that an institution, not an institution in a way that we think about institutions, something that is vulnerable, but it's a lasting thing. It's something that can inspire others to build upon for generations in a decolonizing project, which is long-lasting for these communities. So being participant of that bigger tejido, that bigger weave, that bigger fabric, it's something that first we are very honored to be part of, and that kind of makes us think back about our practices. So just being part of that co-creation of the university is such an inspiring learning opportunity for most of us that I think if we can pull this together, it will really change communities' relationships in the Amazon. And so that's kind of what the message.
Right. Okay. So the last question is to all of you. I will start by asking this to Anne-Marie. But all of you can just have a quick thought, on the question, which is very goal-oriented. What is the one word to focus on and the one word to forget when it comes to ecology? Just trying to drill it down to something that, maybe somebody can really catch on to and just go about.
So I think my first word is adaptation. I think somebody in this group mentioned it already, but this is what I really realized in the last months and years. What we have to learn is really adaptation. We cannot run with our heads against the wall and say, but I want this, and it was always like this. No, now the situation is different. And the one word which I would like really to eliminate from my vocabulary, and also the vocabulary of the people I'm working with, is, well, it's the umbrella word ignorance. I don't know, I don't want.
Sorry, I think we lost you there, but that was great. I think adaptation and ignorance, adaptation to focus on and ignorance to eliminate. Pankaj, what about you? You're on mute.
I was hoping we'll run out of time and you'll say, no, Pankaj, you don't have. I don't know. I mean, it's really,
okay.
Yeah, it's difficult and too short a time to think about it. But
sure.
Yes, I'm going to let that pass, and I'll think about it, and I'll write back to you, and then you can give me a gift or award for actually answering.
Okay. Ursula, do you, in case if you have a word to focus on or to forget?
I must say I have a hard time. I think what I came across in Ecuador in the forest was the problem that our way of thinking has a lot to do with property, and that forecloses us to think about the earth in a different way. And I wish I could change that around, but I have no concrete recommendation what words would actually perform this enormous task.
Okay.
But thank you.
Thank you. Ivan, something on your mind?
Yeah, well, yes. So I think the words that we need to forget are two, if I may: nature and culture. And I think the words that we need to focus on and taking inspiration from indigenous communities in southern Mexico and the Zapatista movement is pluriverse. We don't live in a universe. We don't live in a world, in one world. We live, and the university project is teaching us that we live in a multiplicity of worlds, and we can pass that separation bridge and really engage with the relentless co-creation of worlds and start thinking about life and institutions and decisions from the vantage point of the pluriverse. I think that's a word that I will definitely invite people to focus on.
Right. Thank you for that. Robin, do you have either one or both?
Ivan stole my nature culture. That's really great.
Sorry, Robin, there are many other dualisms to undo, so you can pick your point if you want.
No, it's really great. I think that's a great pair of words to remove or to think about. And also pluriverse is really great. I mean, in my personal experience, I was for many years fascinated with the terms of self-organization, and there's Varela who talks a lot about autopoiesis, like the cell who creates itself by creating a boundary. And I really loved how this got deconstructed by Donna Haraway, amongst others, by saying, well, there is no self-organization. There is no something that creates itself out of nothing by putting up boundaries. There's also only like the new term she brings up is sympoiesis, not autopoiesis, but sympoiesis, because it's created together through an interaction. It's not nothing makes itself. It emerges through interactions, through pluriverses, through polyphony of interactions of many things on many different levels that we can maybe not even fathom. So maybe that's the thing that me personally got erased.
Can I add something incredibly simple?
Yes, please.
People were asking what I enjoyed about working with the museum, for example. I went, they are can-do people. So I have two phrases. One I would get rid of, can't. I hate the word can't. And the other one is, yeah, we can do that. So either get rid of can't, but we can do. And I think it's just very simple as that.
Sure. Thank you, Jasmine. Johannes?
My word to forget is probably indifference or carelessness, and the other one is kind of a link to the birth of my little boy, which just came in 7 months ago. Yes, that's probably the biggest hope when we talk about hope, and this is also connected to it's such a game changer. So it's stay curious, stay open.
Congratulations! Sorry, I just had to say that. I'll go away again now. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
And I have to stick around now for him, and I have now a responsibility, and I learn every day so much, and that's my biggest goal now. Yeah.
Thank you.
My hope.
Okay, Marcus, do you have words for us?
Almost everything already said, huh? But what impresses me always the most when I'm working in the Amazon is when I have contact to indigenous people, is their world view, which differs a lot from ours, because they see themselves always as being a part of something bigger. So I would say that would be the word of preference, and maybe the word to forget about is our accelerated individualism.
Right. Thank you. Last two, Richard. You're mute.
Right. So yeah, there are two words that have been my mantra for the last few years, and again, I speak completely from the focus subject of the issues that the waste creates for our planet. And I believe the two words that the first one that we need to incorporate and make it a big part of our living is the word respect. I think it encompasses everything that needs to be done, and if we could show a little more respect, a lot of the problems that we create would just disappear. And the word that I definitely think we must eliminate is the word convenience, because in our quest to make living easy, we seem to have kind of become very selfish as a race, and we think that convenience seems to be the translation to making life easy. But I also believe that this convenience is bringing on us so many challenges and creating so many obstacles. So if we could get rid of convenience, I think it would make a huge difference to our lives. So yeah, those are the two words: respect and convenience. Respect to keep, convenience to be out.
Thank you, Richard. And we'll end with Tida.
I've noticed about two words, but I'll show a quick picture. Actually, I think that's the best way to kind of show.
Right.
Eco and ego. We just have to understand the balance.
Right.
Thank you so much for that. Can't forget about any of them.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just these single words, just a visual also that makes such a big difference for like these complex things that people get into, and one word sometimes helps them unlock the way forward. And that was the last bit. And yeah, with this, though we are 10 minutes late, but thank you so much for being part of today, for being there, especially for joining the conversation with the inquirers. It's not something that happens all the time, especially when it comes to ecology, to have all of you who have tremendous experience and expertise in what you do, to have taken out your time to share that with these people, even though it was a small number, and then to come together and to have this conversation to share all these multiple perspectives on ecology and the near future of nature, I would say. We are very grateful for your participation, and it's meant a lot for what we are trying to do with the story of mind, and I'm sure this will help us forge the way forward. Thank you.